Hello, welcome to the 100th episode of the For All the Saints podcast. And where are we? We're in the middle of the English countryside in the village of Downham. And we're here to film inside St. Leonard's Church in Downham, which the village is really special. It's special to me, and I was thinking, how can we make the 100th episode really special? And I thought, come to a place I love because of its rich history with the church, the connections with the church in England. There are so many people here who were converted by Heber C Kimballs, and some of the stories of his mission are just amazing and happened here in this village and in the surrounding villages. So we have a friend who's a historian, Peter Fagg, joining to discuss that. And I just want to give a special thanks to the Parochial Church Council and the Ashton family for letting us record inside the chapel. It is an active Anglican church serving the community in the local area. You can visit it, but it is an active Anglican church. So I'm so grateful that they would let us record in it. And yes, without further ado, let's head in. Welcome back to the For All the Saints podcast, our special 100th episode, and I'm delighted to have with me Peter Fagg. Peter, thanks for joining.
Thank you.
And we're here in this very special location, St. Leonard's Chapel in Downham, where Queen Mary herself once stood and declared that it was the best view from a church in the whole country. But it's more than just a pretty village, isn't it, Peter?
No, this visually, it's just stunning. It's one of those villages that feels kind of untouched, which makes it very pleasant on a tourist level. But there's a spiritual level to this whole area that runs deep. And not just for people of our faith. Quakers, Methodists also consider this a sacred spot. And here we are, the Latter-day Saints then coming in 1837, and it just adds to it another layer.
Mm-hmm. What's the Quaker connection? Could you share that with us?
Yeah, so just outside the window here, we have Pendle Hill. And in 1652, George Fox climbed that hill. And he claimed to have a vision in which he saw the people prepared. And then he came down, went up into the Lake District around Ulverston and Sedberg up there. And there he found groups who were seeking a return to primitive Christianity. And from them he founds the Society of Friends, or the Quakers.
Amazing. So that was 1652.
Yeah.
Going back 40 years, there was obviously a very historically significant thing that happened here as well, right? The Pendle witch trials, which are
yes.
world famous. Obviously not religious, but but that was that on Pendle Hill?
Yeah, it's quite interesting actually. On this side, we've got all these wonderful stories of faith and inspiration, and on the opposite side is the Pendle witches on there.
Right,
so it's almost like a yin and yang, an opposition in all things sort of thing. And I thought it was quite funny that some town planners named the road that goes around that side the A666, the sign of the devil.
That is funny. Yeah, so 10 women were tried and hanged for witchcraft in 1612, the Pendle witch trials, the most famous or most documented witch trials, which is, really crazy. But we're not here to talk about that.
It's fine.
Peter, is it too far to say that the place we're in and the villages nearby and the areas surrounding this literally saved the church?
I don't think it is. If you go back to the founding of this whole mission, in the history of the church by Joseph Smith, he actually states, God revealed to me that something new must be done for the salvation of the church. And the very next line, what does he do? He sets apart Heber C Kimballs to come on this mission to England. So here he is saying, this was revealed to me. This was for the salvation of the church, not just a mission. This was literally going to change things. So I don't think it's far-fetched at all. And if you look about the contribution then over the next few decades, the British saints, the British church became stronger than the American church numerically. But then, of course, the call was gather. And so this influx of new faith, both temporally and spiritually, builds up Zion in Nauvoo and then, of course, in the West. So, no, I don't think that's a dangerous thing to say at all. And as you look at the lead up to this as well, I love some of the pre-stories, the stories before the story. So even before our missionaries step foot in this land, great things have been happening across in Kirtland and Toronto in Canada, which prepare this mission.
I'm not familiar with that.
Well, so let's go back.
Let's do it.
Once upon a time, in the early 1800s, when we're right in the depths of the Industrial Revolution, lots of British families decide, I'm going to shift and move, get out of here. And just 4 families as an example, up in the Lake District north of here, 1817, we have the Russell family, 8 children, their parents. The Taylor family, James and Agnes Taylor, who's
The Taylors.
John Taylor's mum and dad. 1830 they go across. The Goodsons down in London, same, the Fieldings, Joseph, Mary and Mercy, all leave. So between 1870 to about 1832, those 4 families all end in Toronto. There they start to worship together, very like-minded individuals. Unbeknownst to them, meanwhile, Heber C Kimballs goes along to the home of Parley and Thankful Pratt in Kirtland and offers a blessing. And in that blessing he says that she will get well, she will conceive a son, that Parley would go on a mission to Canada, and that mission to Canada will open the doorway to England. And that comes around 2 ways. First off is the missionaries that are selected. We have 7 elders. 4 of them are Canadian converts who join because of Parley's mission there. And then when they come here, they've got to decide, now where do we start? And they could have gone down to London, they could have gone and stayed in Liverpool, but that mission that goes from July of 1837 finishes in April of 1838. They go to 4 areas. They go to Preston, and the reason they go there is because the Fieldings have a brother there. They go to Bedford, and that's because the Fieldings have family still down there. They go to Alston, which is where the Russell family were from, and then they come up this valley. So 3 of the 4 areas were because of Canadian converts. So Isaac Russell was one of those missionaries. He goes back to his birthplace. Joseph Fielding, let's go see my family members. So not only is the majority of the missionary force Canadian converts, but the places they select are because of their connections.
Wow.
So that to me is just kind of like little tender mercies, little miracles kind of happening before anything else even happens here.
Wow. I didn't know any of that. That's so interesting. And you look and you see, like, we're in the technically kind of the middle of nowhere. We're in this tiny village in the countryside. And yet, for me, some of the most tender accounts that were ever recorded in church history were in Heber C Kimballs' mission journals from this area and Joseph Fielding's journals. I read them often, and I'm lucky to live not too far from here, and I just come and try and visualize things that happened. But what brought Heber C Kimballs directly to Downham and Chapburn, the neighbouring village?
Yeah, so they've been doing the work in Preston, and then a lady called Janetta Richards. So she lives just over this is the Ribble Valley, but the next valley along is the Hodder, and there's a tiny village called Walkerfold. That's where she was from. And she goes into Preston. She meets with one of her friends, who happens to be one of the first 9 converts in Preston. You've joined a new church. What's all this about? Sort of. And she listens, she converts, she gets baptised in the Ribble, and then she's nervous about going home. She says, how do I tell my father, the Reverend John Richards, I've joined a new church? And Heber prophesies to her and says, not only will he accept your conversion, he'll invite me to come up and preach. And shortly after, he gets an invite to come up the valley. So that's what first brings him and Joseph Fielding and Orson Hyde as well up the valley. They preach in Walkerfold, and the same thing happens as had happened in Preston, in that people start to convert, and suddenly Reverend Richards goes, no, I don't want that happening. So he shuts his doors and stops the preaching. But from Janetta's influence, that starts to spread to families through the Hodder and into the Ribble Valley. And so they gradually work their way up from village to town, and they come to Clitheroe. So Clitheroe's the kind of the main market town in this upper part of the valley, and they have some success there. And like good missionaries, they turn to these Clitheroe converts and say, any suggestions? Where else can we go? And they reply, do not bother going to Chapburn and Downham. So we're in Downham, and Chapburn is just about a mile away from us. And they said, don't bother going to those two villages. They are not God-fearing, and you'll be wasting your time. They're wicked people, sort of thing. And Heber's response was, well, I'm called to bring sinners to repentance. And he comes here, and as you say, has some of his most touching encounters. The Ashton family who own the village we're sitting in, I asked him once what he felt about that response from the Clitheroe saints.
Yeah.
You know, that these aren't God-fearing places. He says, well, I'm a bit surprised because here we've got this Church of England church. Him and his family have been worshipping here since the 1550s, I think it is, 1530s. And there's been a church probably for about 1,000 years, they think, on this site. So that's pretty well established. And then at the very other end of the village was the Methodist church.
Yes.
So the village was bookended by these two active congregations. So what he thinks, and I probably agree with this, is that the Clitheroe saints had some brand of Christianity that they had tried to introduce into these two villages and were reproved and sent back in. So that makes them not God-fearing. In other words, you don't believe what we believe, so yeah, we don't want anything to do with you.
Right, I see. Was there any actual connection to this church? Like, would Heber have come here in St. Leonard's?
I've never actually seen any record of any of our missionaries actually being in the church itself. It usually just says the village Downham, and this is what we did in Downham.
Right.
I've never seen them.
Right. I feel like I have to mention the Ashtons that you mentioned.
Yes.
Because you talked about how, it's almost as it was when Heber was here. And I think a lot of credit goes to them for keeping it that way, right?
Oh, absolutely. So what had happened is, like most of Britain, was divided up into these kind of feudal lands sort of thing. And, if you were loyal to the king, you're given this grand estate. And what's happened over the centuries is those have gradually been divided up, whether it be through inheritance taxes or bad stewardship or gambling or whatever sort of thing. So there's very few estates that are still intact, and this is one of them. They had sold off some houses, but then they had decided, they'd seen what was happening over the other side of Pendle Hill, all these big industrial towns, and what were cute little villages like this had been swallowed up with cotton mills and workers' houses. And they didn't want that to happen here. And so they made an active thing. They bought up the houses that they had sold, and now every home is theirs. They're the landlords. And there's 7 farms surrounding us as well, which they also oversee. And I think that's a great credit to them, that they've been able to keep that intact. And it's just a delight, I think, just to come here.
It really is. It's such a joy that it is kept like that. It's so evocative when you come here, and especially when we're kind of meeting with tour groups that visit from America and otherwise, and you just really soak in the atmosphere. It really matches the spirit that you feel from the stories.
And the nice thing as well is they've done things like, we don't want lines down the roads, our lampposts, they have electricity, they have Wi-Fi here, but the lampposts are painted black instead of industrial silver, and there's no overhead wires kind of going over. So just things like that. Nice touch.
And there's a good pub and ice cream as well.
Yes,
of
course. Yeah.
Which the Ashtons asked me to say. But going back to these Heber C Kimballs experiences, would you share with us some of the experiences that happen here, these tender experiences?
Yeah. So imagine this, you've just been told, don't bother going, they're not God-fearing, so you're not quite sure what you're going to receive. But their first arrival is actually a mile from here in Chapburn. And they arrive, they find what was probably an old tithe barn to preach in. And Heber actually stands on a barrel as his podium, and the citizens of Chapburn gather around him. And at the end of that sermon, which he goes through the basic gospel principles, at the end there's a lady called Elizabeth Partington, tugs his coat and says, Master, Master, will you baptize me? And me, and me, and me. He ends up baptizing approximately 25 people on that first visit. I've always wished I could be a fly on the wall. What was it that he said precisely, and what was the call to action that he gave? Then he comes here to Downham, And the same thing happens, and then he records between 25 to 30 people are baptised. Again, after his first sermon. He goes back to Chapburn, and there's not room inside the barn. There's quite a few people now curious, what's this all about? And so he has to stand on a wall and preaches outside. And then it says a great many. So we don't know how many were baptised that day, but we know that between 5 days they baptise 110 people. And that also includes some, there's another little village called Waddington, but the majority were Chapman and Downham. So that was kind of the initial thing, which was a good response. But then on their other visits, they would come, they'd baptise, they'd ordain. One instance, they're coming along from Chapburn, and I've actually got, this is a copy of Joseph Fielding's journal. His granddaughter took his journal and just copied it out, sort of thing, which is quite fun. But this is Joseph Fielding now recording. He says, "It was very affecting to witness our parting. The streets were almost lined with them looking after us and weeping. Brother Kimball left his blessing on them, and the whole place. He walked with his hat off, and they all followed, as with their eyes as far as they could." And then he says, "The people came to meet us as soon as they saw us, and we could hardly get along for shaking hands. About 30 followed us to the latter place, Downham, mostly children from 10 to 15 years of age, and they joined hands across the street and sang, 'I am like a bright and morning star.'" And then he carries on just saying different things, but that's quite touching, I think, if you can imagine those children walking along. And then he talks about stopping in a field just up here somewhere and having, they had like a little prayer meeting, and he expressed he never felt such love as he did towards these young children. And then when it comes to say farewell, and this was quite a touching encounter for Heber particularly, at this point in 1838 we're not talking gathering. That doesn't happen until Brigham Young arrives in 1840.
Okay.
So this is farewell. They have no idea, will I ever see you again? I don't know. So both sides are very emotional. He's weeping, they're weeping, and he talks about having to stop at a stream and bathe his eyes on 3 occasions because he felt so overcome with emotion for the place. And then I've bought another book. Just to illustrate the effect this had on him, he said, I felt as I'd never felt before. Now remember, this is an apostle. This is somebody who's accepted that there's prophets, who's accepted conversion and been baptised. So he's had spiritual experiences and confirmations of that. But yeah, he's saying, I'd never felt like this before. And this is a Journal of Discourses. So this is 20 years later in he's given a sermon in the Tabernacle. And he says, "I recollect being in England in the town of Chapburn, Lancashire. And while there, I felt as if my whole system was alive. I felt quickened by some unseen power. We pulled off our hats, for we felt such a sacred and holy feeling. I told Joseph about it when I came home." Yeah, so it's just fun, that he felt there's something special about this place. And that was reflected, I guess, in the number of conversions they had in that first mission.
Yeah, I mean, those stories are just mind-blowing, aren't they?
Yeah.
To imagine those things going on. And Joseph Smith did respond about Heber's mission, didn't he?
Yes.
When he spoke to him and related the experiences of Downham and Chapburn. Is that right?
Yeah, so this is a statement that needs footnotes, and it doesn't have footnotes.
Oh,
the reason being,
okay.
because he says, "Did you not understand it? That's where ancient prophets dedicated the area, and that blessing then fell upon you." So my mind explodes. Okay, who were these ancient prophets?
Yeah.
When were they here? What were they doing? And he didn't give any footnote, didn't give any more explanation. He does actually, in this recollection of it, in this talk he gives, Heber says, "Brother Heber, that place was dedicated by one of the old prophets, and it will always be filled with the Spirit of life, which I think is kind of a
Very
fun
interesting.
little thing. Yeah. So, what? That's one of the things when I get through the pearly gates. Okay, I want to know who was here.
Yeah.
You know, what were they doing here? I mean, Britain's got lots of little legends of Peter being here, Paul being here, the Saviour being here, but they are just legends. We don't know the facts behind that, but it'll be fun to know.
And there are so many, I think we forget, because we're quite a secular nation these days, we forget about our spiritual past. Even then, the rumours of when you look at like Stonehenge and all of these stone circles, and they're saying there must have been some kind of ceremonial thing going on with it. I'm going for a weekend, I love Wales, like go there, well, we're going there pretty soon, and right next to where we're staying I found this stone circle that's shaped like a crown, with like the stones come out diagonally, and they were saying it was like the most beautiful Bronze Age thing in Britain.
Right.
And it just leads me to thinking, you know, when I hear that, I think, yeah, we sometimes forget about our ancient spiritual roots in this country. And it's nice, in many ways this is more of a modern story, even though it's history to us in our church, but we are a spiritual people, I like to think.
Yeah, no, it's a sacred land, and it contributes in so many ways. You know, sometimes we just look at 1837 first mission and what happens after that. But for centuries before that, we have so many forerunners who are just laying simple freedoms, simple liberties, standards and values that we then benefit from. In fact, on that thought, we, as church members, we often use that scripture, the field is white, all ready to harvest. And it's become kind of like a thesis statement to me. It's kind of like, well, that's cool. You know, we came in, we harvested, and we witnessed that with these stories, with Dan Jones in Wales, Wilford Woodruff, United Brethren, down in London, all those sort of things. But if the field is ready to harvest, it means that somebody else had already ploughed that field, that somebody else had weeded it, got rid of all the stones, planted, nurtured that crop, so that when we turned up and the field was ready to harvest, a lot of the hard work had already been done. And I just think, as not just as Brits, but as a church, we owe a lot to many of the things that happened in Great Britain, century after century.
It's something I love about the pageants that we put on here for people. If people at home have ever watched the Nauvoo pageant, it kind of starts with people getting off the boat and those pioneers moving to Nauvoo and founding that area, and of course, amazing story there. But when you watch the British pageant, before the saints get on the boat, the very start of the British pageant, there's all of these reformers and the people who went through horrific consequences for their evangelizing of the faith and trying to, you know, bring the Bible to English. It's just so inspiring to see.
Yeah.
I love that. I love that about English history anyway. But back to Downham again. What is the legacy of Downham specifically? You mentioned that decades after the contributions still happen. With Downham, I think I've met some people here and shared my testimony about, you know, the missionary work that happened here with people, and they've come thinking that the whole village was converted.
Okay.
And that this was a really and of course miracles did happen and conversions did happen. But the whole village wasn't converted, was it? And actually,
No.
You know, it's not like that.
No, I've heard that a few times mentioned, and I know of no such place in the British Isles.
That would be cool, though.
It would. But, and that's one of the dangers of history sometimes, is we naturally glean the stories that we like out of them, and we repeat those stories, and people hear them, and it's a Chinese whispers thing. Oh, you know, this was a successful missionary spot, lots of people joined, all the people joined, everybody in the county joined, you know, it just kind of gets blown out of proportion. And I think, you know, even, like, well, let's use Downham, for example. Now there's about 150 people that live here. Back then, there's probably about 400. Again, we're still quite an agricultural village at that time. So the population was a lot larger, but there's only probably about 10% of the Downham people actually join the church.
Right.
And of the 10% that join, not all of them stay faithful, and not all of them emigrate and gather with the saints. But still, the significance of what happened here, the spiritual promptings that they received, makes that small 10% significant. And Chapburn was a lot larger. There's probably close to about 100 plus that join just down the road. So that was a larger unit of the church than what we see here. But even that, I think, is inspiring to me, because just one person's decision has a huge impact. And today, every year I see people who come from those first 9 baptisms in Preston. I see people who descend from the Downham converts. So no, the whole village did not join, but it was a significant contribution.
Could you share with us about the gathering that happened, this call to gather? Were there any instances of people that you've heard accounts of from Downham or Chapburn that did get on the boats and trek over?
Yeah. So this whole valley gives us lots of families who contribute. Okay. A classic one from here is a man called James Smithies. Now the Smithies family, they are early to join. Wilford Woodruff, when he comes, so he serves 2 missions, 1840 and 1845. He's particularly fond of the Smithies because Father Smithies was the best fly fisherman in the county, and he'd never witnessed fly fishing before. So he goes down to the River Ribble with Father Smithies and sees him using his rod in the little baits, and it's so impressive that he actually buys the stuff and takes it back with him and using it on the thing. But James Smithies, when he gets across, here he's a musical man. So he plays the violin, the cello, either trumpet or trombone, I'm not quite sure which of those it was, but when he gets over there, his musical skill is recognised. He's in the Nauvoo band, so he's playing there. When he gets to Salt Lake, he's there, and he becomes the 3rd conductor of the Tabernacle Choir. So we've got a bit of Tabernacle Choir music going on here.
I didn't know that, that's really cool.
Yeah, so he's from Downham. When you go through the valley here, you just find lots of little families like that. So the Corbridges, Elder Corbridge of the 70, so his family joins the church here. So there were,
really?
Yeah, so there were 10 children, 5 who joined the church and emigrate, 5 who don't. And again, it was interesting because I was helping a lady called Beryl Corbridge, who was not a member of the church, do her family history. And I forgot about her for a few years until the Corbridges, the American LDS side, comes across on a tour. So we're going around, and I arranged for her to be there, and they didn't know who she was. And she was so shocked. So it was a nice little reunion. They hadn't seen each other for 160 years, sort of thing.
Wow.
But what she was so surprised at, from her side, that 50%, there was about 20 to 25 living Corbridges still around here. And this was a coach of about 40 Corbridges who represented a few hundred living Corbridges. And she was just kind of like, oh, wow, that side of the family did a lot better in populating than we did. So you've got them like that. You've got other instances like the Ellison family who join. That's an interesting family because they get to Nauvoo and the family split. So you've already had the breakup of the family that's here. And then when they get there, the parents decide they're not going to go west. They're going to stay in Nauvoo, and they continue to farm there. But Matthew Ellison goes west. So you've almost got 3 stages of the Ellison family. Some still here, some in Nauvoo, Illinois, some in Utah. And he becomes a very successful cattle rancher. But the reason I found out about them is because there's a man in Chipping, a village not far from here. He has a wodge of letters all addressed from Nauvoo, Illinois. And this is the parents writing back to the family here. So it's just fun to see those little kind of interactions. And when you go through this graveyard, you just look at some of the names. In fact, just right in front of us, there's that war memorial on the wall there.
Yeah.
And there you see Webster, you see Smithies, there's Parker, there's Burroughs on the wall over there. These are all names of people who joined the church. These aren't though.
Yes, yeah.
This is later, but the family names are still here.
Yes, Smithies, I can see it right there.
Yeah. The Parker family, you'll see a few of them buried out here. There's more Smithies buried out here. The Parkers are quite interesting because they weren't from Downham. From what I can make out, I think they were just on the other side of Pendle here there. And you've also got Parkers up here. But this particular Parkers, their grandchild in Utah, becomes Leroy Parker, who we know as Butch Cassidy. So they're
Okay.
very proud.
Interesting.
Hey, we raised Butch Cassidy. Hey, sort of things. And then there's some quite touching ones as well. There's a lady called Mary Haskin Parker, who ends up marrying Samuel Richards. So she's from here. When she's still single, she's leaving. Her parents have already emigrated, joined the church and gone. She's leaving afterwards. And she makes a great journal of winter quarters, one of the best journals we've got of that event. And she says something along, this is paraphrasing, but she says something along the line, I'm about to say goodbye to my dear sick sister. I lived in one of the most beautiful valleys my eyes ever beheld, with the stream running by the door, the warbling of the birds in the trees, and I'm about to go to a distant port, that was Liverpool to her, and from there to travel over an extended ocean. And what if the people I'm travelling with should forget their covenants and leave me a stranger in a strange land? I then gave vent to my tears, which until that time I had endeavoured to conceal. Which I think is quite touching, because beautiful valley, and you can't help but wonder, I'm going to Zion, and you arrive in Utah, and you look out at this desert, and you kind of think, welcome to Zion. And I think that must have been a shock for some of them, to see kind of quite a bleak sort of valley. I mean, very nice mountains and trees and everything, but to recognise that wasn't Zion. That just happens to be the place where it was. That they were the Zion. They were the people building that up.
It's another reason why, for me, that the teachings of Heber C Kimballs and the experiences from his journal fascinate me so much. Just to, again, the interest of being a fly on the wall, to see this great, powerful manifestation of God's Spirit that must have carried so much weight that it pushed these people to say, yes, I will go and endure the intense things that they endured, to go and be with the people and gather with in Zion. It's almost overwhelming when I just sit and try and comprehend that. It makes me think, would I do that?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'd like to think I would.
Yeah.
But we have the accounts of what they went through.
Yeah, what kind of pioneer would I make?
Yes.
Sort of thing. Yeah.
Would I be the one moaning and wanting chocolate or something like that? Or would I be braving through and trying to help others and singing the hymns with everyone else? I don't know. I guess that's a personal reflection.
Yeah, and it's easy to romanticise the past in thinking, everybody was happy and skipping and singing the songs of Zion and not reflecting that actually it was an adventure for them. And sometimes it was a lot better than what they had here. Particularly viewing some of the industrial towns when life expectancy was so low.
I suppose back then, was it aspirational to be one of the people moving to America? Not just for the church, but just in general, emigrating to, like the Taylors moving to Canada and people like that. Was that almost a kind of...
Yeah, I don't know in terms of the whole population what was happening, but we talk about our figures of how many people emigrate. So we start emigrating in 1840, that's the first group that leaves, and between then and 1900, there's somewhere in the region of about 85,000. Different historians will say it's lower, different historians will say it's higher.
Yeah.
But around 85,000 is kind of a ballpark figure. At that same time period, we've got about 9 million people leaving these shores. So our 85,000 is just a small part of a much bigger movement of people going out and around. But it's a notable movement, people just kind of observe it, and it's unusual because it's organised. It's not these individual families moving away. It's here's a group of 100, here's a group of 200, here's a group of 800 saints all going on one boat. So it sticks out.
And one of those people who noticed them was Charles Dickens, right?
Absolutely.
His famous quote, "The pick and flower of England."
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. In fact, even more famous, I think, or should be more famous, is what he says at the end of that. So that's a whole chapter he writes.
I thought it was just a little quote.
Oh no, so what he does, he goes to watch an emigrant ship leaving, 800 Mormons on there. So he interviews the captain, he interviews the Mormon agent, which is George Q. Callan, interviews some of the other converts. And it's when he's talking to the captain, he says, I would say they are in their degree the pick and flower of England. But then at the end of the chapter, this last paragraph is so cool. He says, now I have been aboard emigrant ships before, but these people are so strikingly different. I went aboard the Amazon to bear testimony against them, as I fully expected I would. But my predispositions and tendencies must not affect me as an honest witness. I went over the Amazon's side, feeling it impossible to deny that so far some remarkable influence has produced a remarkable result, which better known influences have often missed. Which I just think is a great testimony.
That's a powerful quote.
Yeah.
That's a testimony.
Yeah.
I didn't know that you said that. I thought it was just a classic cliche quote.
Yeah, no, he'd written some negative things about the church until he had this experience. And he dedicates a whole chapter. There's a book of his called The Uncommercial Traveller. And it's not fiction, it's all observation. Going with the police on the River Thames, visiting a graveyard, going down to the docks to see a Mormon emigrant ship, disappearing. Yeah, so it's quite cool.
So later on, we see Downham's effect and you know, the church's ongoing relationship. I mean, we're here, they've allowed us to film here very kindly. Well, some of the prophets visited, didn't they? Wilford Woodruff visited here, and he was quite fond of it too. Actually, yes. I have a quote of his, although you probably have memorised it. Nice. I have to write these things down. But I have this great quote from him. Wilford Woodruff, I was much pleased with the meek and quiet spirit manifested amongst them. I walked through the village of Chapburn, of which Elder Kimballs speaks in his journal, as walking through it with his head uncovered and blessing the place, while the children had hold of his garments as he passed along. I felt the Spirit of God rest upon me while passing through the street where such scenes of interest had transpired with Elder Kimball and other servants of God. I love that too, because I get that same feeling when I walk in Chapburn and Downham. That same spirit pervades the whole place, as we've mentioned a few times. But there's a new plaque, isn't there, that commemorates some other things that have gone on.
So we have a few church leaders and different apostles have kind of been through here. And over the years, we have asked the Ashton family, can we commemorate that in some way? And they've allowed us previously, in 1987, you go down to the little bridge there, you'll see a bench, and there's a little plaque saying, given to the citizens of Downham from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So that's just a small plaque like that. If you go in next to the toilets, there's kind of like a little visitor centre with some plaques about the history of Downham, some of the things that happened here. And there you'll see a little picture of Heber C Kimballs, and on there is his quote about never feeling like this before in my life. So they've allowed us to have those. But we have, talking of other apostles coming here, Elder Holland came here. And what happened, he wasn't an apostle at this time, he was serving in the area presidency, so he's based in Solihull. Him and his wife Pat were down there when they got a call from the First Presidency, we're going to have a second temple in Britain, somewhere in the north of England. So church employees were sent out to find possible locations. So Elder and Sister Holland had visited these sites. They went to where the temple is now, and it was just 6 farmers' fields. There were bluebells in the fields, sort of thing. But he had to decide, I've seen these sites, which is the site that I should recommend to the First Presidency? To make that decision, he comes here. So he's familiar with these stories. He's seen Heber's, Wilford's accounts of this place. He'd been here before. And he walks through this village, and he follows the tiny stream that goes down to the end of the village, just for a secluded spot. And he goes out into this farmer's field, and he finds there's a big sycamore tree there, which has a natural trunk as a seat. So he sits on that trunk, and there he petitions his Heavenly Father, where should we build this second house of the Lord? And there he got the very distinct impression it should go on the site that it is, even though you couldn't build anything that was worship based on that site. It was zoned by the government or the local council for economic development. They wanted warehouses. And if you look around there was already 40 warehouses tucked away, and there's loads of new warehouses being built opposite. That's what they'd intended to happen on that site. But that was his recommendation. First Presidency agreed with him. They purchased the land in 92. we still can't build a place of worship on it. So those things kind of unfold. But anyway, that tree then became kind of a pilgrimage in a way. People wanted to go to see where the Preston Temple was confirmed, I guess it's a way of doing it. So we refer to it as Elder Holland's tree down there. And the plaque you've just referred to just a couple of weeks ago, and it's about to be dedicated, I don't know if dedicated is the right word, official opening, commemorated in a couple of weeks. And it's a big stone they've put, there's two little plaques, one mentions Elder Holland and the sycamore tree, and the other refers to our stake president was invited when the Queen asked everybody to plant trees for her Jubilee. The church went to the Ashtons and said, can we plant some trees near Elder Holland's tree? So we planted two brand new trees just by that tree as well. So that's what the two plaques are, one for Elder Holland and his tree, and the two that and the church is mentioned on that plaque as well.
Amazing. I was trying to find it before, but I couldn't find it, so I'm going to go and have a look at the new plaque. Now there are many ups with our church tree, these miraculous experiences, but there are also some kind of terrifying experiences, or experiences that weren't so pleasant. And one of them happened not too far from here, where Elder Kimball was staying and lodging on St Wilfrid Street in Preston. And I wonder if you could share with us that account, because it's quite particularly striking.
Yeah, so they've only been in the mission field for that week in Preston, and they're about to baptise the first 9 converts in the River Ribble in Preston. And Isaac Russell is disturbed. Now, he's as they were coming across, he was often disturbed he felt like evil spirits and whatnot. And some of the other elders actually, in fact, Joseph Fielding in his journal actually records, he says it's him again, he's going, as if he's kind of, oh no, here he goes, another one, sort of thing. And then he repents of saying that, because Isaac Russell goes up to Heber and says, I feel disturbed as if by evil spirits, please can you give me a blessing? So Heber places his hands on Isaac's head, and he's suddenly thrown by some power, unseen power, to the floor. And when he comes to, there's Orson Hyde and Willard Richards both supporting him. And then they said a vision opens before all of their eyes, in which they saw evil spirits rushing towards them, with malignity depicted on their faces, giving them curses, giving them threats. Heber is saturated with sweat and passes out again, and finally they dismiss them. And as they do so, this is Willard and Orson dismissing them, they record a very unusual occurrence. One of the evil spirits turns and says to them, I didn't mean anything against you personally. So it's almost like a little apology. It's in my contract. The big guys told me to come and scare you, but sorry, nothing personal. But they say, in the name of the Saviour, we command you to depart. And then that closed the vision. And their response to that, or Heber's response, was, we're not worthy. That's why this has happened. But again, when he gets back in 1838, he's talking to the prophet Joseph about this. And Joseph had learnt about this because Heber had written the account to his wife, who then shared it with the prophet. And Joseph said when he read that letter, he rejoiced, because then he knew the gospel was about to take root in Britain. And again, his experience as a young boy in the sacred grove, about to utter this amazing prayer, the adversary steps in to stop him. The adversary was probably very aware that the prophet had said that God had given this revelation that something new must be done for the church, and that was this mission. So they haven't even performed any baptisms, so what's he doing? He's going to make them pack their bags and run, and it backfires, because it just reaffirms the plan of salvation. And Joseph, in his journal, he says, if we didn't know there was a devil before, we do now. So suddenly it's more of a reality. It's just kind of, oh yeah, this is a real force we're dealing with here. And despite that challenge, they go ahead, perform the first 9 baptisms, and the stone starts rolling.
Was it the very next day that they performed the baptisms?
Yeah. Well, actually, I'm not 100% sure if that was the morning of, or anyway. So it was, but yeah, it was right before those baptisms take place on the second Sunday. They're there. Can you imagine being on a mission?
Seems so easy back then to convert people. It's a lot more difficult now.
Yes, yeah.
But tell you what, that place is, because you can still see it, it's right there, and it's eerie. It's after hundreds of years, it's still got this kind of eerie feel to it. I don't know if you feel the same. Maybe it's just because it's old. Yeah. Old places are just eerie anyway. But Peter, we've quizzed you enough about all these stories related to here, but what's, as a historian, as someone who, you're like the guy to speak to about all the church history in this area, I'm very modest. What's your favourite account of our rich British church history? Do you have a personal favourite?
That's a hard one, because there's lots of places I really loved going, but there's also I like simple stories as well. Often when we look in our books, we tend to tell the stories of the A-listers, the celebrities of the faith sort of thing.
Yeah.
Those big missionaries. But I also like to see the stories of people like you and me, who, just kind of general church membership, who contribute in their own little way on that. And there's actually two instances that I really quite like. These are both ladies who very simply make a difference. And the first one is actually just near the temple. There's a village called Eccleston. And there was a family there called the Moons. Heber C Kimballs meets with them, they reject him. And sometime later, he's going past, he had no intention of going to their home again, being rejected. But he suddenly feels this urge, I need to go back. And when he's greeted, Mrs. Moon just is over the moon. She is just so excited.
Sounds like a nursery rhyme.
Yeah, it does. Because what had happened, they'd rejected them, they were used to studying, they were used to praying and getting spiritual promptings. And she suddenly felt like the heavens are closed, they were like lead above her. And then she mentioned this to her daughters, who'd also been raised in the same way. And one of the daughters says, do you think it's because we rejected that missionary? And she said, as soon as we accepted that, it suddenly felt like the heavens were opened again and began to pray, please give us another chance to listen to his message. So of course when Heber turns up at the front door, it's an answer to their prayers. And from that family then, the whole family joined. There's 13 joined within a few weeks, and by the time he's finished, there's over 30 of the Moon family's extended family that have joined. And then the very first party that sent out emigrants is led by John Moon. He's put in charge of that first group that leaves in 1840, and they go on to have a huge impact across in the States. Now that's not an earth-shattering story in terms of thousands of conversions, but what I love is that sometimes we tend to think we've got monopoly on spiritual things happening, and there was somebody who knew how to pray, who knew how to study, who knew how to feel the Spirit, and that was what led them there. So that just that simplicity of doing those simple things had a huge impact upon the lives of thousands of people that were to follow from that Moon descendants going across. And then the other one's kind of, I've already mentioned the story of Parley P. Pratt going to Toronto, but that whole thing was shifted by someone washing their clothes. And that was somebody from just north of us in the village of Alston. There was a lady called Isabella, and she was one of the Russell children. So this family that had left in 1817, she's over there, she marries, her name's now Elizabeth Walton, and she's in washing her clothes. What she doesn't know is down the road, she's friends with the Taylors. Parley P. Pratt is being rejected, and he's leaving the community. He thinks, I can't do any good here. So he's saying goodbye to the Taylors, and Isabella suddenly gets this prompting, I need to go out. So she follows that prompting, she walks past the Taylor's home, she gets a second prompting, you need to go in here. And she thinks in her mind, I'll go visit my sister first, on the way back I'll come and say hi to the Taylors. And a third prompting comes, no, you need to go in now. And she's met at the door by Leonora Cannon, Taylor, who's now married, John Taylor. And she says, there's this man next door, Parley P. Pratt, with his bags packed, about to leave, and I think he's a man of God. And Isabella says, I know now why I was sent here today. Tell him I've got a place he can stay, a place he can preach, and I will gather people to listen to that message. And what that does is give that whole community a second chance. So that's when the Taylors, the Fieldings, the Goodsons, I've missed somebody out there as well, Russells, Theodore Turley, Samuel Mulliner, Alexander Wright, all of these people start to join the church because of that And what does that do? That opens the door to England. So I just look at that tender little thing, someone washing their clothes, getting a spiritual prompting and acting on it, I think is a story worthy of repeating.
That's an incredible story. It's interesting that some of these great moments, if not kind of looked at in a spiritual lens, could have just been fleeting moments. I always think that about my own experiences, because I don't have these interesting, powerful stories, but when I record spiritual impressions and promptings I have, they end up almost expanding when I actually record them and ponder them. And when I'm having a hard time or something, or struggling down the road, I return to those experiences that I've recorded, and because of their expansion and the fact that I, in that moment, had the faith to record them, they've become really important spiritual moments, right? Look at, and I can actually see what went on from that. So I agree, I love those more ordinary miracles, ordinary tender mercies. So thank you for sharing that. And Peter, we're kind of wrapping up now. Some people struggle to reconcile some of the imperfections that occur within church history with their kind of perception of what should be a perfect, infallible organizational people or prophets. And yet, you and I are people who really love and take a real interest in the history of the church. How have you come to love it despite its flaws sometimes?
Yeah, I think like this, when I look at this village, what we concentrate on Downham is these beautiful experiences that they've had. Beautiful experience, Elder Nelson, Elder Holland, Elder Ballard have all been moved walking through these streets. So modern apostles, old apostles have had those feelings. But that's not all the whole story, because at the same time you get members here turning apostate. You get members here who are influenced by other ministers of religions who decide, no, I don't want anything to do with this anymore. So with all the marvellous miracles, you also get the murmuring masses. And with every wonderful, soul-inspiring, great story, there's stories that can be torn down, and people embezzling, or people breaking the commandments, or being adulterous, or, sort of thing. Members of the church, So it's not, when you join the church, you're not joining a group of perfect people. They come and they bring with them all their follies. In fact, that was one of the words of inspiration that came to the British saints as they were emigrating. It says, when you emigrate, don't think that you're going to come to a perfect Zion-like situation, that the same follies that you have in your heart now will travel with you, and they'll be there. So it's you that's got to do the change. It's you that's got to be recognising spiritual things. So I've been quite lucky in a way, in that when I look at the attacks on the church, because you've got that core base, is it a divine, inspired, God-inspired thing? Is Jesus really the Christ? Was Joseph Smith and his President Nelson, are they really prophets of God? Is this the kingdom of God? If you answer those questions and you feel solid in those questions, those basic principles, then all these other secondary stuff, there's lots of questions I haven't got the answers to, and I might never have the answers to, but they don't affect me. It's just kind of like, I may find that out, I may not. But I have this basic core that just is kind of the guiding light, and the other stuff, it's not like water off a duck's back, because I think, and it's not that I'm not interested in those, and I think those things do need to be looked at and addressed, but it's not the end of the world if they're not. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, this is an Elder Corbridge thing, which is a nice wrapping up thing, I guess. We come back to Downham for the Corbridges, and his brilliant talk, Stand Forever. We focus on those primary questions, and the secondary questions sometimes we get the answer to, sometimes they pale in significance. But do we know those core things? And those are the important things to answer and help us with the others.
Yeah.
So that's a fun serendipitous way to end the episode, back with the descendant of Corbridge sharing with us the wisdom of the people that converted here in Downham and Chapburn.
Just to clarify, they were outside of Corbridge. when I say the Corbridges, they weren't
Yeah.
actually living in Downham when they were converted. They're in Carside Farm, but it's in this valley.
Oh, in the valley.
Just so you don't-
Close enough.
Yeah, go.
But Peter, thank you so much for joining us. This has
Pleasure.
been so much fun. I really appreciate you joining us.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching and listening in to our 100th episode. I hope you enjoyed it.